A single mom no one would hire faced a millionaire CEO. Her truth stunned him. In a cold waiting room where hope goes to die, a worn-out single mother sits clutching her daughter's hand, waiting for an interview she knows she won't get. She's been rejected 47 times. Her rent is 3 months overdue. Her daughter hasn't had a new pair of shoes in 2 years. But today, across a mahogany desk, she will meet a man who judges resumes, not people. A millionaire CEO who has never known struggle. What happens next will challenge everything he believes about success, worthiness, and second chances. This is not just a story about a job interview. This is a story about the courage it takes to keep standing when the world keeps pushing you down. Margaret Hayes woke up at 4:30 in the morning, not because she wanted to, but because anxiety had become her most faithful alarm clock. In the pale darkness of her one-bedroom apartment, she sat at the edge of the couch where her 8-year-old daughter, Emma, slept curled beneath a thin blanket. The apartment was silent except for the rhythmic drip of the kitchen faucet, a leak she couldn't afford to fix. She looked at the pile of envelopes on the coffee table. Electric bill, water bill, final notice from the landlord. The words blurred together, but the numbers were crystal clear. 3 months behind on rent, $72 in her checking account. And today was Friday, which meant Emma's school would be serving pizza for lunch, the one meal her daughter looked forward to all week. Margaret had already slipped $2 into Emma's backpack the night before, money that should have gone toward bus fare. Margaret had not always lived like this. 3 years ago, she had been a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm, married to a man she thought would be her partner for life. They had plans: a house with a backyard, maybe another child, family vacations to the beach. Then came the diagnosis. Stage 3 breast cancer. The treatments were brutal. She lost her hair, her strength, and eventually her job. The company said they understood, but understanding doesn't pay medical bills. Her husband said he loved her, but love apparently had limits. He left 6 months into her treatment, leaving behind divorce papers and a mountain of debt. Now, 2 years cancer-free, but financially destroyed, Margaret was a ghost in the job market. Her resume had a 2-year gap that screamed liability to every hiring manager. She had applied to 47 positions in 3 months, 47 rejections. Some companies didn't even bother to respond. She ran her fingers through her short hair-grown back, but still unfamiliar. Emma stirred on the couch, and Margaret quickly wiped her eyes. She had learned to cry silently, a skill no mother should have to master. "Mama?" Emma's voice was soft and sleepy. "I'm here, sweetheart. Go back to sleep. It's early." But Emma sat up, rubbing her eyes. Even at 8 years old, she had learned to read her mother's silences. "Is today the interview day?" Margaret nodded. "Yes, baby, at 10 o'clock. "Are you nervous?" "A little," Margaret admitted, though terrified would have been more accurate. This interview was different. It wasn't for another entry-level position where she'd be overqualified and overlooked. This was for an executive assistant role at Hartwell Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the state. The pay was more than she had made as an accountant. It would change everything. It would also be the hardest interview to get. The CEO, Richard Hartwell, was known for being brilliant, demanding, and utterly unforgiving of weakness. He had built his empire from the ground up, and he expected everyone around him to have the same relentless drive. Margaret had read articles about him, a man who worked 16-hour days, who had never taken a vacation, who measured success in quarterly earnings and efficiency reports. She was the opposite of everything he valued. She had gaps in her resume. She had obligations, a child who sometimes got sick, school events she couldn't miss. She had survived cancer, but survival wasn't a line item on a corporate balance sheet. "You're going to do great, Mama," Emma said with the absolute certainty only a child can have. She reached over and squeezed Margaret's hand. "You're the smartest person I know." Margaret pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "And you're the bravest person I know." As the sun began to rise over the city, Margaret made breakfast oatmeal with a sprinkle of cinnamon, the cheapest meal that still felt like love. She watched Emma eat, chattering about a book she was reading at school, about her friend Sophie's new kitten, about anything except the fear that lived in both their hearts. At 7:30, Margaret walked Emma to the bus stop, holding her hand the entire way. Other mothers were there, talking about soccer practice and piano lessons and birthday parties. Margaret smiled politely but said nothing. She had learned that poverty is isolating, that when you can't afford to participate, you become invisible. "I love you," Margaret whispered as Emma climbed onto the bus. "Love you more," Emma called back, waving from the window. Margaret stood there until the bus disappeared around the corner, then walked back to the apartment to prepare for the interview that would determine whether they survived or sank. She had one good, outfitted navy blue suit she had bought at a thrift store. She ironed it carefully, her hands steady even as her heart raced. She practiced her answers in the mirror, trying to sound confident, capable, worthy. But the woman looking back at her was tired. The woman in the mirror had circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She had hands that trembled slightly from stress. She had a story that no hiring manager wanted to hear. At 9:15, Margaret left the apartment and caught the bus downtown. She couldn't afford to drive, gas was too expensive, and her car had been repossessed 4 months ago. As the bus rattled through the streets, she stared out the window at a city that felt both familiar and foreign. Somewhere in those blast towers, people were making decisions that would never affect them personally. Somewhere in those boardrooms, men like Richard Hartwell were building empires while people like her were just trying to build a life. The bus stopped 3 blocks from Hartwell Industries. Margaret walked the rest of the way, her heels clicking on the sidewalk, her resume clutched in her hand like a prayer. Richard Hartwell arrived at his office at 6 o'clock in the morning, as he had every workday for the past 20 years. His assistant, his fourth in 18 months, had left a perfectly organized schedule on his desk. 8 meetings, 12 calls, 6 interviews for her replacement. He had fired her 3 days ago, not because she was incompetent, but because she had asked for time off to attend her son's graduation. Richard didn't understand the request. Graduations happened every year. Quarterly earnings reports did not. He understood that this made him unpopular. He understood that people whispered about him at company parties he never attended, that they called him cold, ruthless, a machine in a suit. He didn't care. Caring about popularity was a distraction, and Richard Hartwell did not get distracted. He had built Hartwell Industries from nothing. 25 years ago, he had been a kid from nowhere with a business degree and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. He had slept in his office. He had missed birthdays, holidays, relationships. His ex-wife had left him, citing emotional unavailability, which Richard translated as "success requires sacrifice." Now, at 48, he had everything he had worked for: a company worth $300 million, a penthouse apartment with a view of the entire city, a reputation as one of the most effective CEOs in the industry. What he didn't have was someone who could keep up with him. His HR director, Patricia, had sent him 6 candidates for the executive assistant position. He had scanned their resumes the night before, unimpressed. Too young, too inexperienced, too many job changes, too many red flags. One resume had caught his attention, though not in a good way. Margaret Hayes. 2-year employment gap. Previous position ended abruptly. Single mother. He had almost tossed it immediately. Single mothers meant complications, sick children, school schedules, divided attention. But Patricia had insisted he meet her. "She's persistent," Patricia had said. "She's called 3 times. She's sent a follow-up letter. She wants this badly." "Desperation isn't a qualification," Richard had replied, but he had agreed to the interview anyway, mostly to prove his point. He would meet Margaret Hayes, confirm his instincts, and move on to a more suitable candidate. At 9:45, Patricia called his office. "Ms. Hayes is here, early." Richard glanced at his watch. Early was good. It showed respect for his time. Send her in at 10 exactly, not before. He used the 15 minutes to review her resume again, looking for something, anything, that might redeem the gaps and red flags. She had been good at her previous job. Strong performance reviews, recommendations from colleagues. Then nothing for 2 years, followed by a series of short-term positions, none lasting more than 3 months. Classic instability, Richard thought. Whatever happened 2 years ago had broken something in her professionally. People didn't recover from that kind of disruption. They became liabilities. At precisely 10 o'clock, Patricia knocked on his door. "Mr. Hartwell, Ms. Hayes is ready. Send her in." The woman who entered his office was not what he expected. She was younger than her resume suggested, probably in her early 30s. She wore a simple navy suit that had seen better days, but she carried herself with a dignity that surprised him. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact steady. "Ms. Hayes, please sit." "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Hartwell." Her voice was calm, but he heard the slight tremor underneath, the kind that came from nerves held tightly in check. Richard opened her resume between them like evidence in a trial. "Let's get straight to the point. You have a 2-year gap in your employment history. Explain it." He watched her face carefully. Most candidates stumbled here, offering excuses, apologies, explanations that revealed weakness. Margaret Hayes did none of those things. Instead, she took a slow breath and looked him directly in the eye. "I had cancer. Stage 3 breast cancer. The treatment took everything I had, physically, financially, emotionally. I lost my job. I lost my marriage. I lost almost everything except my daughter and my will to survive. I spent 2 years fighting for my life, Mr. Hartwell, and I won." The silence in the office was absolute. Richard had heard thousands of explanations over his career, but never one delivered with such unflinching honesty. He had expected excuses. She had given him truth. "And the short-term positions after that?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I was overqualified for most of them and underestimated by all of them. Employers see the gap and assume I'm damaged goods. They hire me because they need someone, but they never trust me enough to let me prove myself. So I keep searching for someone who will." Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her. "This position requires complete dedication, long hours, high pressure, no room for personal emergencies or distractions. Can you handle that with a child at home?" Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger, but a deep, quiet strength. "Mr. Hartwell, I've spent 2 years balancing chemotherapy appointments, single parenthood, and survival on $72 in my checking account. I've learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. I've learned to make impossible decisions about whether to buy groceries or pay the electric bill. I've learned that dedication isn't about convenience. It's about doing what needs to be done, no matter how hard it gets. So yes, I can handle this position. The question isn't whether I'm capable. The question is whether you're willing to see past your assumptions long enough to let me prove it." Richard Hartwell was not a man easily surprised, but Margaret Hayes had just done exactly that. In 25 years of conducting interviews, no one had ever challenged him so directly, so calmly. Most people cowered. They apologized for their weaknesses, they over-explained their gaps, they tried desperately to tell him what they thought he wanted to hear. Margaret Hayes had done none of those things. She had simply told the truth and left it at his feet like a gauntlet. He should have ended the interview right there. He should have thanked her for her time, shaken her hand, and moved on to the next candidate. Someone uncomplicated, someone who fit neatly into his world of spreadsheets and strategy. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the way she had looked at him when she spoke about her daughter, the fierce protectiveness in her eyes. Maybe it was the quiet dignity she carried despite wearing a suit that was clearly second-hand. Or maybe it was the uncomfortable realization that her words had struck something he had buried years ago, the memory of a younger Richard Hartwell who had also been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. "Tell me about your daughter," he said, surprising himself. Margaret blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Emma is 8. She's in 3rd grade. She loves reading, especially adventure stories. She's kind, resilient, and far braver than any child should have to be. What does she think you're doing today? She knows I'm interviewing for a position that could change our lives. She believes in me more than I sometimes believe in myself." Richard nodded slowly. "The nature of this job means late nights, early mornings, unexpected demands. How will you manage that with a child?" Margaret met his gaze without hesitation, the same way every working parent manages, with careful planning, reliable backup plans, and the understanding that my daughter's needs and my professional responsibilities both matter. "I won't lie to you, Mr. Hartwell. There may be times when I need to leave at 5:15 instead of 5:30 because of a school event, but I'll also be here at 6 in the morning to make up the time. I'll answer emails at midnight after Emma's asleep. I'll do whatever it takes because this isn't just a job to me, it's our lifeline. And if I need you to stay until 8 o'clock for an emergency meeting, Then I'll arrange for my neighbor to pick up Emma from aftercare. I'll make it work." "You'll make it work," Richard repeated, testing the phrase in his mouth. How many times had he said those exact words? How many sacrifices had he made in the name of making it work? He stood abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. From 40 stories up, people looked like ants, scurrying through their insignificant lives. He had always found comfort in that perspective. Up here, individual struggles didn't matter, only results mattered. But standing there with Margaret Hayes in his office, he found himself thinking about something he hadn't considered in years: what it cost to achieve those results. "Ms. Hayes, I'm going to be frank with you. You're not the ideal candidate on paper. You have gaps that concern me. You have obligations that could interfere with the demands of this position. You're asking me to take a significant risk. I understand that, Mr. Hardwell." He turned to face her. "But I'm going to offer you something anyway. Not the job, not yet. A trial period. 1 week. You'll work the full schedule, handle the full workload. If you can prove to me that you can manage both your responsibilities and your daughter without compromise, we'll discuss a permanent position." Margaret's eyes widened slightly, and for the first time he saw genuine emotion break through her careful composure. Hope. Fragile and desperate. 1 week, starting Monday, 8 o'clock. Don't be late. She stood, extending her hand. "I won't let you down." Richard shook her hand, feeling the slight tremor in her grip, the adrenaline of someone who had just been thrown a lifeline. "See that you don't." After she left, Richard sat alone in his office, staring at her resume. Patricia knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a privilege that came with 15 years of working together. "Well?" she asked. "1 week trial." Patricia's eyebrows shot up. "Really? I didn't think she was your type." "She's not." "Then why?" Richard was silent for a long moment. "Because she reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Me. 25 years ago, when I was hungry enough to work 3 jobs and desperate enough to take any chance offered." Patricia studied him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You've never told me that story." "Because I'd forgotten it," Richard said quietly. "Margaret Hayes just reminded me." Meanwhile, Margaret sat on the bus heading home, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. A week. She had 1 week to prove herself to a man who had built an empire on efficiency and had no patience for human weakness. The rent was due in 5 days. The trial period didn't start until Monday, and she wouldn't see a paycheck for 2 weeks even if she got the permanent position. But it was a chance, the first real chance she'd had in 3 years. When she picked up Emma from the aftercare program that afternoon, she knelt down and hugged her daughter tightly. "Did you get the job, Mama?" "Not yet, sweetheart, but I got something almost as good a chance to earn it." Emma beamed. "I knew you would. You're amazing." That night, Margaret lay awake on the couch, staring at the ceiling and calculating. She would need someone to watch Emma in the early mornings and late evenings. Mrs. Rodriguez next door might help, but Margaret couldn't afford to pay her. She'd have to ask anyway, to promise payment when if the job became permanent. She would need bus fare for the week, $35. That left $37 for food and everything else. They could make it work. They had survived on less. But the weight of it pressed down on her chest until breathing felt difficult. 1 week to prove she could be everything Richard Hartwell needed, while still being everything Emma needed. 1 week to show no cracks, no weakness, no hint of the exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She thought about Emma's words, "You're amazing." Margaret didn't feel amazing. She felt terrified, but terror and courage, she had learned, often wore the same face. Monday morning arrived like a storm Margaret had been watching on the horizon, inevitable, powerful and capable of either destroying her or proving her strength. She woke at 4 o'clock, dressed in the dark, and prepared Emma's breakfast and lunch before her daughter even stirred. At 5:30, she gently woke Emma and walked her next door to Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. The elderly woman answered in her bathrobe, her face kind, despite the early hour. "Don't you worry about a thing," Mrs. Rodriguez said, patting Margaret's hand. "Emma and I will have breakfast together, and I'll walk her to the bus stop. You go show them what you're made of." Margaret arrived at Hartwell Industries at 7:15. Richard Hartwell was already there, standing in the reception area with Patricia, reviewing something on a tablet. "You're early," he said without looking up. "I wanted to be prepared." "Good. Patricia will show you your desk and explain the systems. We have a board meeting at 9. I'll need the quarterly reports formatted and printed by 8:30. The files are on the shared drive." For the next 2 hours, Margaret worked at a pace that would have broken most people. The quarterly reports were extensive 70 pages of data that needed to be formatted according to precise specifications. She found errors in the original files, corrected them, and had everything printed and bound by 8:20. Richard glanced through them without comment, then handed them back. "Page 43. The chart alignment is off by 3 millimeters. Margaret looked at the page. He was right. Barely noticeable, but wrong. She reprinted the page, replaced it, and handed the report back at 8:28. "Better," Richard said, and walked away. Patricia, who had been watching from her desk, came over and whispered, "That's the closest thing to praise you'll get from him. Congratulations." The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Margaret took notes, managed the presentation slides, and anticipated Richard's needs before he asked coffee refilled, documents retrieved, phone calls screened. When one of the board members challenged Richard's expansion strategy, Margaret quickly pulled up the market analysis data he needed to support his argument. After the meeting, Richard stopped at her desk. "You're quick. Thank you." "Don't thank me. It's an observation, not a compliment. Can you stay until 7 tonight? We need to prepare for tomorrow's investor call." Margaret's heart sank. 7 o'clock. Emma would be out of school at 3. Mrs. Rodriguez could watch her until 6. But after that, she pulled out her phone and quickly texted Mrs. Rodriguez. "Might be late. Can you keep E until 7? We'll owe you." The response came within seconds. "Of course, Mija. Take your time." Margaret looked up at Richard. "I can stay until 7. The pattern repeated itself every day that week. 12-hour days that stretched into 13, then 14. Margaret arrived before Richard and left after him. She learned his habits, how he took his coffee, which reports he wanted first thing in the morning, the subtle signs that indicated his mood. She also learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. Every night, she would arrive home exhausted, spend an hour with Emma helping with homework, reading together, pretending everything was fine, and then work for another 2 hours on her laptop, preparing for the next day. By Wednesday, Emma had stopped asking when Mama would be home earlier. By Thursday, Margaret noticed dark circles under her daughter's eyes that matched her own. On Friday morning, Emma was unusually quiet during breakfast at Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Margaret asked, kneeling beside her. "Nothing." "Emma." The little girl looked up with eyes that were trying very hard not to cry. "I miss you." The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. "I'm right here, baby." "No, you're not. You're tired all the time. And even when you're home, you're thinking about work." "I can tell." Margaret pulled Emma close, feeling her daughter's small body against hers, and wanted to cry. "I know. I'm so sorry. But it's just for a little while longer, okay? Just until we're safe." "We're already safe," Emma whispered. "We have each other." Margaret arrived at work that morning 15 minutes late, the first time all week, because she had sat in Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment holding her daughter, unable to let go. Richard noticed immediately. "You're late. I apologize. It won't happen again." He studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Are you ill?" "No." "You look exhausted." "I'm fine." That wasn't the question. He gestured to his office. "Come with me." Margaret followed, her heart pounding. This was it. He was going to tell her the trial period was over, that she wasn't cut out for this, that he needed someone without complications. Richard closed the door and turned to face her. "Sit down." She sat. "I've been watching you all week, Ms. Hayes. Your work is impeccable. You're efficient, intelligent, and you anticipate needs before they're voiced. You're everything I require in an assistant." Margaret waited for the but she knew was coming. "But you're also exhausted. You're running on empty, and it's starting to show. What happened this morning?" Margaret considered lying, then decided against it. Richard Hartwell had shown her the respect of honesty. She owed him the same. "My daughter told me she misses me. She's 8 years old, and she misses her mother because I've been working 14-hour days trying to prove I deserve this job. I was late because I couldn't let go of her." Richard was silent for a long moment. Then he did something Margaret never expected. He sat down in the chair beside her instead of behind his desk, a gesture that felt almost human. "When I was building this company," he said quietly, "I had a partner. We were engaged. She asked me once to leave the office by 6 o'clock for her sister's wedding rehearsal dinner. Just one night. 6 o'clock. He paused. I didn't go. I told her the company needed me more. She left 6 months later. I haven't spoken to her in 20 years. Margaret didn't know what to say. Richard continued. I told myself it was worth it. That sacrifice was the price of success. I built an empire, Miss Hayes, but I built it alone, and I'm not sure anymore if that was the victory I thought it was." He stood and walked to the window, his back to her. "The permanent position is yours if you want it, not because you've proven you can sacrifice everything, but because you've proven you won't. You were late this morning because your daughter needed you, and instead of lying about it, you told me the truth." Margaret felt tears threatening and fought them back. "The position is mine. With conditions, you'll work 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. No weekends unless absolutely critical, and I mean crisis-level critical. When you leave at 5, you leave. No emails after 6 unless I mark them urgent. You'll have health insurance starting immediately, and a salary that will allow you to stop choosing between rent and groceries." "I don't understand," Margaret whispered. "Why?" Richard turned to face her. "Because Emma was right. You're already safe. You have each other. And I'd forgotten what that means until you reminded me." Margaret's first official day as Richard Hartwell's permanent executive assistant began with her arriving at 7:45 early enough to be prepared, late enough to have breakfast with Emma. She had dropped her daughter at school herself for the first time in a week, and the hug Emma gave her had been worth more than any salary. Richard was already in his office when she arrived, but instead of the usual mountain of urgent tasks, he simply nodded and said, "Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Hartwell." "Richard," he corrected. "If we're going to work together, we might as well use first names." It was a small gesture, but in the rigid world Richard had built around himself, it was revolutionary. Over the next few weeks, Margaret noticed other changes. Richard still worked long hours, but he no longer expected her to match them. When 5 o'clock came, he would glance up from his desk and say, "Go home to Emma." At first, Margaret felt guilty leaving while he stayed, but Patricia had pulled her aside one day. "Don't feel bad," Patricia said. "In 15 years of working here, I've never seen him leave before 8 o'clock. But twice last week, I saw him pack up at 6:30. You're changing him whether you realize it or not." Margaret didn't know if that was true, but she did notice subtle shifts. Richard started asking about Emma, how she was doing in school, what book she was currently reading. He remembered details Margaret had mentioned in passing. Once, when Margaret mentioned that Emma's class was doing a project on business leaders, Richard spent an hour after a meeting explaining supply chain management in terms an 8-year-old could understand, then sent Margaret home with a signed copy of his company's annual report for Emma's project. "Tell her to focus on the innovation section," he said. "That's the interesting part." Emma had been thrilled and her project had earned an A, but more importantly, she had stopped looking worried every time Margaret left for work. The real transformation came 6 weeks into Margaret's permanent position. Richard called her into his office late one afternoon and gestured to a chair across from his desk. "I need to tell you something," he said, his expression more uncertain than she'd ever seen it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since you started here, about priorities, about what success actually means." Margaret waited. "I've spent 25 years building this company, and in the process, I built a culture that mirrors my own worst qualities. We work people to exhaustion. We reward sacrifice over sustainability. We measure worth in hours logged instead of value created." He paused. "I want to change that, but I don't know how." "What brought this on?" Margaret asked gently. Richard pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. It was old, faded, a picture of a young couple standing in front of a tiny apartment. The man was clearly a young Richard, full of hope and ambition. The woman beside him was beautiful, smiling at the camera with complete trust. "Her name was Sarah," Richard said quietly. "We were going to build this company together, But I got so focused on the building that I forgot about the together part. She tried to tell me I was losing myself, that success without connection was just expensive loneliness. I didn't listen. He put the phone away. Last month I found out she passed away. Cancer, ironically the same type you survived. She had married someone else, had 2 kids, lived a full life, and I realized that while I was building my empire, she was building something far more valuable, a life filled with people she loved and who loved her. Margaret felt a lump forming in her throat. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm telling you this because you helped me see what I'd lost sight of. Watching you fight to balance work and Emma, seeing you refuse to sacrifice her for your career, it reminded me that the most important thing we build isn't a company. It's a life. What are you going to do? Margaret asked. Richard leaned back in his chair. I'm going to start making changes. Real ones. Reasonable work hours. Better benefits. A culture that values people, not just productivity. And I need your help. My help? You've lived what most of my employees are living, the impossible balance, the constant fear, the exhaustion of trying to be everything to everyone. I need someone who understands that to help me fix it. Will you? Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a sense of purpose beyond just survival. Yes, over the next 6 months, Hartwell Industries transformed. Richard implemented flexible work schedules. He increased parental leave. He created an employee assistance program that provided counseling and support. He personally reviewed the cases of 3 employees who had been let go for circumstances beyond their control and quietly offered them their jobs back. Not everyone understood the changes. Some of the old guard grumbled that Richard was going soft, that compassion had no place in business, but productivity didn't drop, it increased. Employee turnover plummeted. The company culture began to shift from fear-based to trust-based, and Richard himself changed. He started leaving the office at reasonable hours. He took weekends off. He even went on vacation for the first time in 2 decades, a fishing trip that Patricia had practically forced him to take. One afternoon, Richard called Margaret into his office with an unusual expression on his face, something close to nervousness. I need to ask you something personal, he said. Okay, Emma's birthday is coming up. You mentioned she wanted to go to the Science Museum but couldn't afford the admission. Margaret felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't meant for him to overhear that conversation with Patricia. It's fine. We'll do something else. What if I told you the museum is having a special event that day for employees and their families? Completely free admission, including the planetarium show Emma wanted to see. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Is there really an employee event? Richard had the grace to look sheepish. There is now. I called them this morning and arranged it for all employees and their families. I thought it might be nice. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. You arranged a whole museum event for Emma's birthday? For all the employees' families, Richard corrected. Emma just gave me the idea. There are probably dozens of kids who would love to go but can't afford it. This way everyone benefits. Thank you, Margaret whispered. You have no idea what this means. Actually, Richard said quietly, I think I'm beginning to. 1 year after Margaret Hayes walked into Richard Hartwell's office, desperate for a chance, she sat in that same office with a very different feeling: gratitude, certainty, and something close to pride. Richard had asked her to come in early for a special meeting. When she arrived, she found him standing at the window with an expression she'd learned to recognize. He was about to do something important. Margaret, sit down. She sat, curious. Richard turned to face her. A year ago, you came to me asking for a job. I almost said no. I had convinced myself that hiring you would be a liability, that your circumstances would make you unreliable. He shook his head. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. Richard. He held up a hand. Let me finish. This past year, you've been more than an excellent assistant. You've been a catalyst for change that this company desperately needed. The cultural transformation we've undergone, the policy changes, the shift in how we treat our employees. It all started with you, with your courage to tell the truth, to stand up for what matters, to refuse to compromise on being both a professional and a mother. He walked to his desk and picked up a folder. I'm promoting you to Director of Employee Relations. It's a new position, one that will focus on ensuring that Hartwell Industries continues to be a place where people can work with dignity, where parents can be parents, where human beings are valued as more than just productivity metrics. Margaret stared at him, stunned. Director? The salary is 3 times what you're making now. The position comes with a full benefits package, including a college fund for Emma that the company will contribute to annually. You'll have your own office, your own team, and the authority to make real changes. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Margaret laughed, tears streaming down her face. Yes, absolutely yes. Richard smiled, a genuine, warm expression that had become less rare over the past year. There's something else. Do you remember me telling you about Sarah? Margaret nodded. Before she died, she set up a foundation to help single parents facing medical crises, people in situations like yours. Her family reached out to me last month, asking if Hartwell Industries would consider partnering with the foundation. We're going to match every donation they receive, and we're establishing an employee fund to help our own people who face similar challenges. That's beautiful, Margaret whispered. It's what she would have wanted, and it's what you inspired. Richard paused. She would have liked you, I think. You're both fighters. Later that afternoon, Margaret left work at 5 o'clock as usual and drove to Emma's school. She had been able to buy a car 3 months ago, a reliable used sedan that felt like a luxury vehicle compared to the bus. Emma came running out, backpack bouncing, face lit up with her usual after-school energy. Mama, guess what? I got 100% on my math test. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Margaret hugged her daughter tight. How about we celebrate? Ice cream? Really? Really? As they sat in the ice cream shop, Emma chattering about her day, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. The fear that had been her constant companion for 3 years had finally loosened its grip. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were living. Mama? Emma said, her voice suddenly serious. Yes, baby. Remember when you went to that interview and you were so scared? Margaret nodded. I prayed that night. I asked God to help Mr. Hartwell see how special you are. I think he listened. Margaret felt tears well up. I think he did, sweetheart. I think he absolutely did. That night, after Emma was asleep, Margaret stood in their apartment, no longer the sparse, desperate space it had once been. They had furniture now, pictures on the walls, Emma's artwork displayed proudly. The refrigerator was full. The bills were paid. But more than that, they had hope. Margaret pulled out her journal, a new habit she'd developed to process the profound changes in her life. She wrote, "A year ago, I sat in a waiting room believing that no one would hire me, that my circumstances had made me unemployable, that the world had no space for broken people trying to rebuild. I was wrong. Richard Hartwell gave me a chance when he could have dismissed me. But more than that, he let me change him. He let my truth challenge his assumptions. And in doing so, he didn't just save my life. He helped me reclaim it. I've learned that the most important business we conduct isn't in boardrooms. It's in the small moments of choosing compassion over convenience, humanity over efficiency, faith over fear. Richard learned it too. And now, together, we're trying to build something rare, a workplace that honors both productivity and people, success and significance. Emma asked me tonight what I'm most proud of this year. I told her it wasn't the promotion or the salary or even our new apartment. It's that I never gave up, not when I was rejected 47 times, not when I had $72 and a mountain of bills, not when it would have been easier to accept defeat, because giving up would have taught Emma that struggle means surrender. And what I wanted to teach her, what I hope I've taught her, is that struggle means strength, that falling down 47 times means you get up 48, that the measure of a person isn't in how much they have, but in how much they endure and still choose kindness, still choose hope, still choose to believe in second chances. Richard Hartwell gave me a second chance, and I gave him one too, a chance to remember that empires built on exhaustion crumble eventually, but communities built on compassion last forever. Hartwell Industries was featured in a major business magazine. The article wasn't about quarterly earnings or market share. It was about corporate culture transformation, about a CEO who had redefined success to include human dignity. Richard kept a copy of the article on his desk, but next to it was something he valued more, a drawing Emma had made for him. It showed 3 stick figures, a woman, a man in a suit, and a little girl. Above it, in careful third-grade handwriting, it said, "Mr. Richard, thank you for giving my mama a chance. You're a good man. Love, Emma." Richard had framed it, and sometimes late in the afternoon when the office was quiet, he would look at that drawing and remember a desperate woman who had walked into his office and changed everything by refusing to pretend that struggling meant weakness. She had reminded him that the strongest thing a person can do is keep standing when the world keeps pushing them down. And in doing so, she had saved far more than herself. She had saved him too. This story reminds us that second chances change lives, but only when we're brave enough to offer them and humble enough to receive them. Margaret Hayes walked into an interview broken by circumstance, but unbroken in spirit. Richard Hartwell sat behind a desk, fortified by success, but isolated by it. Neither knew that their meeting would transform both their lives. The lesson isn't just about persistence, though Margaret's refusal to quit after 47 rejections shows us the power of perseverance. It's not just about compassion, though Richard's choice to look beyond a resume and see a human being demonstrates the impact of mercy. The deepest lesson is this: we are all carrying burdens others cannot see. The single mother in your office might be choosing between rent and food. The CEO at the top might be drowning in loneliness. The person asking for a chance might be your greatest asset. The person giving a chance might need saving as much as the one receiving it. True success isn't measured in quarterly earnings or corner offices. It's measured in lives touched, dignity restored, hope rekindled. It's in the choice to see people really see them beyond their resumes, beyond their circumstances, beyond the easy assumptions we make to protect ourselves from complicated truths. Margaret taught Richard that strength isn't the absence of struggle. It's the refusal to let struggle define you. Richard taught Margaret that some people, when given the truth, rise to meet it with grace. Together, they proved that transformation is possible when we choose compassion over convenience, humanity over efficiency, faith over fear. If this story moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their struggle is not their weakness, it's their strength. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that celebrate the human spirit, the power of second chances, and the belief that goodness, even when tested, always finds a way forward. Remember, you might be 47 rejections into your journey, but rejection number 48 might be the one that changes everything. Keep standing, keep hoping, keep believing that your story isn't over, it's just beginning.